Welcome back to another episode of the Elevated Trader podcast. Kristen, glad you're here. Super good to be doing this again. We're into a new book once again. What's the book called?
Homeless to Billionaire.
Homeless to Billionaire. I'm liking this book so far, by the way.
Me too. I listened to it a couple years ago.
Did you? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's unfortunate that we didn't actually start this year out because we're into the new season. We're into season 2. This is the second book. And actually, this would have been a really good book, I think, to start out the year. It's too bad we started out with the new Trading for a Living book instead of this one, because I think there's some goal setting and a few other things that would have been great to start out at the beginning of January. But hey, it's never too late to start. So let's get at it.
Better late than never.
Better late than never. Absolutely. Now, do you want to give a little backstory about, what's happening with this book?
Well, let me just start off by saying I listened to it, but when you listen to things and they give you homework or advice of like making a list or doing that, it's so different when you read it. And we're back to that conversation of actually picking up the book. Now, granted, I have mine on the Kindle, so it's on the iPad, but because I knew it was in my Audible library, I'm listening to it and I'm reading it at the same time. And it might happen to be at 1.5 speeds. Ding! But with all that said, I like the ability to go, ooh, that's really important. And it's not like I'm at the gym or something like that, or cleaning the house, which I do a lot of listening to books like that. But because I'm intently reading it, you make the pause and you're like, okay, I need to go back to this page or this section I want to do that work. I want to do that project. Mm-hmm. So with that, I recommend getting the book, reading it, not just listening to it. This is one of those books, right?
Right.
I won't go into what I think about some of the other books in the past. So, but right out of the gate, the title gets you, right? Like Homeless to Billionaire. And he was, do you remember the country?
No.
I think it's like Thailand. I know that we're not, you and I.
It's spelled Phuket or.
Oh,
yeah. Phuk. Yeah. I don't know how to pronounce that.
I think it's Pahk, something like that.
Kut.
Anyways.
Yeah. Something like that.
Anyways, he's from a very, very small, significantly deprived country. And he was homeless at one point. And he was asking for money. He had borrowed money from this person, from that person, and he got kicked out of his apartment and all these things. And he was living underneath a palm tree. He always wanted to live near the palm trees and the beach. And so here he was. I'm like, am I loving life or am I hating life? And so he ended up really, really hating his life underneath a palm tree on a beautiful tropical beach, but homeless. And so he reached out to a friend, one of the few friends he hadn't asked money from. And what happens what does this guy say, Trace?
Well, he gives him a book.
What does he say? What does he say about his book?
Seriously? You're giving me a book? Like, what am I going to do with a book? I need money. I need a house. I need a place to live. Like, what am I going to do with a book? And, this is actually the first, it really caught my attention when I was reading this book. And it's like, oh, cool. I'm going to read like this. I'm going to enjoy reading this book after I read this part. And the idea around his approach to it was like, okay, you know what? Forget it. I'll take the book and I'm just going to prove that it doesn't work. And I love that approach because he didn't believe, because it was a mindset book and
manifestations.
And he didn't believe for one second that this was going to work. Not at all. And so much so that out of spite, he decided, I'm just going to prove that this is just BS. And I'm going to follow it to the letter and I'm going to do it. And you'll see it doesn't work. And then maybe you'll help me with appropriate help, right? That was kind of the intention and the attitude that went behind it. And wouldn't he just be surprised, completely and utterly surprised that, oh, it does work. And I just thought that was really, playing to the skeptic. I think that is a great approach to anything. Why not take action and go ahead and try and disprove the things that people are suggesting, disprove it and see how far that gets you. I mean, what's the worst case scenario? The worst case scenario is it doesn't work and your position doesn't change. Your position doesn't get any better. It doesn't get any worse. It's just, this doesn't change. But the risk of it getting better is significantly higher, right? So
Yeah.
I like that approach. I like that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing he's like, yeah, I'm gonna, all I want is a cup of coffee, and a coffee happens. And he's like, okay, hold on, I'm gonna ask for some food. Like, and so things just started stepping into his life. And I can really appreciate this. I'm kind of doing some coursework through Paul Martinelli, who's got a coaching program, and he has a very similar story. He
Mhm.
wasn't homeless, but the really long story. If you've ever heard like Les Brown's story or Paul
Yeah.
Martinelli's story, where they've come from and how they were labeled young, and so when people hand them books and push them into out of their comfort zone significantly for bettering your life, with a book, and these books literally change lives. That's how they become these motivational speakers, right? So I could really appreciate this book second time around. I'm in a different mental space. I mean, you and I've been reading a ton in the last year. And so here we go. Now, here's a question for you. Let's say this is you. Someone's, an old friend, an old relative you haven't seen forever. Somebody reaches out to you next week and they're like, give you this huge sob story about where their life is right now. And they're just asking you for some money. What would you do?
Oh, wow. It really depends on the scenario. It really, really, really depends, because for me, my personal view on giving money to people is that that's enabling. That's my personal opinion. And I'm not saying that they don't need it. I'm saying
Mm-hmm.
that there's something else. I mean, giving somebody a fish versus teaching them to fish is two very different scenarios. So
Mm-hmm.
I I have a tendency of moving more towards that way of teaching somebody how to fish versus just giving them a fish. And without some form of accountability, I don't want to be enabling the continuation of whatever it might be. So, for instance, we had, you know, a homeless person that's begging for money, which we get a lot of panhandlers on the streets. I am not going to be giving them money, and that's just my personal choice, but I
Mm-hmm.
will give them food. I
Mm-hmm.
will give them something that I think they can, that'll help them get through like the basic needs. But I can't be part of risking, and I don't want to risk. And again, this is my own personal choice. I'm not judging
Mm-hmm.
anybody that decides to give people money. That's not what I'm saying. This is just for me and how I think and how I feel comfortable. But I don't want to feel like, I don't want the thought going through my head that if I give you money, you're going to spend it on drugs and you're going to
Right.
continue to make that you're going to continue to make a choice that's leading you down a path that is keeping you where you are. I am going to give you everything off my back to help you if you show an incentive that you want to change, you want to help, you want to get out of the situation. I will go over the earth to do that. But to just give you money because you ask for it, like I said, the scenario has to be very, very
Mm-hmm.
specific. And if somebody came to me and said, hey, I need money and this is the reason why, and this is my plan, that's a very different scenario
Mm-hmm.
than I'm down and out and I just need some money. Just hand me some money. That's not really the scenario that I would be going for. So how
And
about
by the
you?
way, our listeners, I did not prompt her with that question. It just came to me while we were just now recording, because I'm like, okay, wonder if somebody came to me. I mean, I think you and I intuitively, or maybe for some strange reason, are just resourceful. We have
Mm-hmm.
resourcefulness. We have audacity. We are strong-willed, and so I'm pretty sure every time you and I've been down and out or backed up into a corner, we figure it out, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good quality. But the other quality is, okay, well, what happens when the negative talk comes in and all these different things, right? That's a whole nother mental game. You and I've
Mm-hmm.
worked really hard on some of that. So what would I do? Again, it is a scenario thing. My mind just goes to like family. maybe friends, maybe an old college friend, something like that, and I think, one of my mentors once really wanted to help somebody they cared really, really significantly about. And they said, well, if you read this, then here's the next step. And so I feel like maybe here's some, but if you read this, or, I agree, like there has to be some give and take instead
Mm-hmm.
of some enabling, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. Like, yeah, I think you and I are kind of on the same camp with that, for sure.
Yeah,
But
for
it's just
sure.
looking at the situation and not just forking over a bunch of money. That
It's a
doesn't help
great
anybody.
question. Yeah, exactly. And it's a
Hmm.
great question. And I think that everybody should think about, how they feel about it. Where is their position and what is their reason behind it, instead of just doing what you think needs to be done because that's what everybody else is doing. It's
Well, reading these books and having these books in your library, and not just the library on your shelf, right? The library in your head
mhm,
allows you to be able to share this knowledge with other people. And so without these books, you don't have that to lean on to
mhm,
help that person.
mhm.
You don't have that in your library to go, this was a great book. This book changed my life. This book is, you need this book right now.
Yeah.
I'll buy you this book.
Do you feel like rock bottom is one of those things necessary to kind of get you to a place where you can accept responsibility for your decisions?
I think it's one of them. I don't think it's necessary.
Right.
I think it's people that have a lot of limiting beliefs and they just stuck where they are and they just play the blame game.
Right.
The IRS, and so and so, and I'm labeled with mental disability, like
I guess let me
whatever. I mean,
rephrase. Yeah. Let me rephrase what I'm saying then, I guess. Do you think that rock bottom is that point when you recognize accountability for your decision? Is that the point at which you realize that every decision that you make has a consequence and you're responsible for that? That surrender moment.
I would love to say yes, but I still think people that do hit rock bottom, if they are used to blaming others all the time, then they don't know how to get out of that mindset.
Right. And then they'll
They're
never get
playing
off of
victim.
rock bottom, right? They'll
Correct.
stay there. Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. All right.
Yep. Or
I
they'll
get
find
it.
somebody to enable them.
Okay.
So,
So I
but
guess
yes.
that's the success part from hitting rock bottom, is being able to hit that switch or recognize that switch, recognize that your decisions all have consequences. Every act that you have has consequences. And he talks about that in this book, and that you need to take responsibility for the choices that you make because they do have consequences. So that leads us into kind of what the very first principle is. We're going to
Mm-hmm.
cover kind of the first four principles of this
Mm-hmm.
book, right? So what is
Right.
the first principle?
Okay, so that one is lead a laser focused life. And that is, what do you desire? What are your goals? And then to me, that leads into what you were just talking about with somebody that's at rock bottom. Well, why? What's your why? And so if you
Mm-hmm.
can answer your why, then you can say, okay, well, to reach my why, to achieve my why, to be my why, all those things, right? Whether it's for your children or whatever it is. Then you can create desires and goals underneath that.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a quick list. I can generalize what his little homework is that he's learned from all his years of books.
Well, before you get there, let's just say that one of the reasons that he came up with this as a first principle is because he realized at some point that his entire life, and the reason that he even ended up homeless was because he had no direction.
Right.
He had no purpose, no direction. He didn't know, like, everything that he was doing. He had no concept of the consequences of every choice because he had no end game in play. There was no direction, no place that he was going. If you're just out driving aimlessly, you would have no reason to turn right or left. There'd be no
Yeah.
purpose. There's no thinking about, well, what happens if I turn right? What happens if I turn left? Is it going to lead me off course? Because there's no thinking about the future. And
Yep.
that's why this particular principle, I think, is really key. So now you can go into the homework. And I actually really liked the whole goal setting
Mm-hmm.
scenario that he did in this. And this has probably been the most concise, easy to understand
Mm-hmm.
way of actually creating goals and coming up with a purpose and a defined direction that you want to
Mm-hmm.
go in. I really like the way that he did this. So I'll let you move on to what you want to say here.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of brush through them, and we don't have to stay on any of them unless we want to, but they are pretty simple, and you can rewind and pause,
Mm-hmm.
which is what I did when I was reading and listening to the book. I went back to that chapter and said, okay, and then I went and found it, and then I wrote them out. So, okay, write down all the things you don't want in your life. And that may not just happen in one sitting. So we have to give ourselves the grace that this list is not maybe just ongoing, but isn't written in a day.
Mm-hmm.
Then draw a line across the sheet of paper. And then I don't know why he says this, but he says get a new sheet of paper. Maybe there's something about drawing the line, right? It says, now write all the things I don't want in life. Write the opposite of what was in the other list. So,
Mm-hmm.
exactly like you have this unhealthy, healthy, like literally that simple. Don't overcomplicate this because you're going to piece this down and you're going to break it down even more. Then it says, now what can I start today for each thing on the list? So this now is breaking it down into an action for each thing that you want.
Mm-hmm.
And then look at the whole list. He every year makes 101 goals. So I was like, geez, I really that's a high target to reach. You've probably been sitting there for a while. It says circle the top 5 things on that list that inspire you to take the most action and add a reasonable timeline to take action to achieve those goals. So you got your top 5,
Mm-hmm.
like those are really speaking to you. And then he's like circle the next 5 and then circle the next 5.
Yeah, and have
So you're
time
kind of
frames. Yeah.
Yep. And then basically he's just like, you're putting them in order of importance to you.
Mm-hmm.
So someone else could look at your list and pick ones that they think that would be important for you, but you need to pick the ones that are important to you.
Yeah.
And then he says, keep accessible and make adjustments as necessary. And he was just saying, like, do you need to tweak this or do you need to change the time frame and all that stuff? And then he's basically saying that think about what you want every day, get your mindset right. So
Mm-hmm.
I've heard bits and pieces of this in different ways, but this is one of my favorite ways of doing this because once you have that new list with the action plans and the deadlines, like I can't imagine looking at 101 of these a day every year. And yeah, I mean, there's more to the chapters of the book that I know what happens that he's going to talk about, so I won't go there. But I did like that section, and I have started mine.
Yeah, and I think it works really well this way by identifying what you don't want first. And I can use housing as an example. We've all lived in a house, even if it's
Mm-hmm.
a cardboard box. We've had some form of a residence. And in each of those locations and experiences that we've had, there's things we know we don't like. It's really hard sometimes to identify the things we do want because we've never had them. That's what makes it really difficult. At least that's where I've found the difficulty. It's like, well, I don't know what I want because I've never had it. And it's so much easier to sit down and say, what do I not want? Because I have had that and I have experienced that. So coming up with those things first is so much easier than trying to figure out what your dream house is going to be or your dream whatever is going to be or what you want out of life or this or that. And I mean, you can even take this principle into figuring out what you want to do for a living, right? You may not know what you want to do. You might be young right now, still in school, still in university, trying to figure your life out. And somebody is telling you, well, you should be a doctor, or you should be a lawyer, or you should be a dentist. And you're like, well, I don't know if I want to do that, right? You know what you don't like. So start there. And from there, you can start to formulate what you do want. And
Yeah.
I really like that principle. So this is something that I'm going to adopt as a new way of setting my goals. I like it a lot. And that was probably so far, that has been my favorite part out of this book. But
Yep. I made
let's
a
move.
note. You know the notes app in your phone?
Yep.
I made a note and I was like, this is a really good place to have this. Like so you can share it with other people. And then the first person I shared it with was my teenage daughter.
Oh, wow.
She was sitting in front of me. And I'm like, okay, there's this really cool way, because we have kind of done some goal setting and things together. So we'll see. We'll see if she does it.
Yeah, it's a great way to do it. So I'm looking forward to talking to my son about it. But what
Okay.
is principle number 2?
Take risks, have responsibility, and take action.
Mm-hmm. What does that mean?
Well, I think people like you and me, we're pretty audacious, but you're going to have to probably step out of your comfort zone and step in the direction of where you're being led. So if you find somebody that is doing or has something that you want, it might be uncomfortable to go and knock on the door and say, I know you don't know me from Adam, but you're leading the life that I want. You know, you have the career I want. You're living in a home that I want. You know, that's pretty audacious.
Mm-hmm.
So taking responsibility for your own actions, your own goals, your own dreams.
I think that's key. That's very key, is taking responsibility and understanding that everything that you do has a consequence. And I think the problem for people that take too much risk sometimes is because they don't think about the consequences. And that's how they end up taking something that's really, really risky, right? You're not thinking about what the worst case scenario is. You're not thinking about what could happen if I take this risk. So I think it's important to really think about that type of thing, but not to a point where it keeps you from actually moving. You still have to be able to accept some form of risk,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the next part was to take action. And I think that's the key to all of this, right? It's the key to everything that you and I have been talking about for the last season and for this season that we're going to be talking about, is all about taking action. It's not just reading a bunch of books. It's about reading the books, taking certain things and then implementing them, taking action. And that's the difference. That's why this worked for him. He got a book, and regardless of whether he believed the book was going to work or not going to work, he took action. Even though it was a negative action, it was to prove the whole book wrong. That was the
Mm-hmm.
point. But he still took action in order to do that. And
Yeah,
that's what led him to success. So the action part is extremely key.
I agree.
For sure. Yeah. Now, you get exactly what you ask for. So ask wisely. I thought that was a really key element, because, again, the whole take risks, responsibility, and action. The responsibility part is understanding, what the consequences of things are. Then the take action part, where you're actually asking for certain things, you need to be prepared to accept the consequences of those actions. So,
Or a lack of action.
right. So you I guess, knowing that is the case, you need to be careful what you ask for, because it might come true. I remember asking for patience a lot. And yeah, and I was young, and I used to say, just I wish I was more patient. I wish I was more patient. Well, guess what? life
Tested,
has
tested,
life has tested
tested.
me and tested me and tested me to give patience. And I remember a female mentor that I had back then. She was much, much older. I was friends with her children, and she used to warn me, you need to be careful asking that in particular. Careful how you're wording that, because that could come back to bite you. And I remember that specifically, asking for patience, and it was just not is not the right thing to be asking for. But boy, did I get it! And I've had to become patient because of all the
Okay.
testing that I've had. So there's I've learned that lesson, universe. It's
Okay.
good. I don't need it
Don't give
anymore.
it again.
Yeah, I don't need it anymore.
I always tell people, I'm like, you're going to keep having to take this test if you can't pass it the first time. So just be aware that's a thing. Okay, what's the next principle?
Actually, before we go on, I wanted to say something else, and that was that I really like this quote that he out of the book. It says, "Failure both hardens your spirit and teaches you lessons. Success comes when you soften and apply the lessons." And I thought that was really, really key. But that, again,
Mm-hmm.
is the difference between taking action and responsibility. So failure hardens your spirit and teaches you lessons. But unless you learn those lessons, unless you're open to them, then it just remains failure. The success comes through actually accepting those teachings, accepting that, taking that responsibility and changing, and that softens you, builds the minute you take responsibility, I can tell you that it starts to soften that hardness that failure comes with. And yeah, that's the way through
I
success. So I
like
thought that
that.
was I wanted to highlight that. Now, the next one is principle number 3. So principle number 3 is focus on I am. And this comes back to the whole affirmations.
Yep.
And I really liked, so he brings up in this, basically there was a study that was done, and I actually read up on the study the other day on playing piano.
Oh, that's
And
a really cool study.
it's a really cool study. So playing piano, and then what they did is they had a couple groups. They had a group that didn't practice, and then they had another group that did practice every day, and then they had another group that only practiced once out of 5 days, and the other days they did a mental practice. And when I say a mental practice, they aren't actually moving their fingers and what have you. They're actually visualizing playing the piano. So they might be doing that from memory, or they might have the piece of music in front of them and they're visualizing. When they're visualizing, they're actually feeling what it would feel like to move their fingers, what it would feel like to, are they standing, how they're sitting, what their posture's like getting
Mm-hmm.
all of the senses involved, and even their auditory. So hearing the notes when they're playing, not physically being in front of the piano. And then what they did is they did brain scans of those groups, and they found that the brain activity that coordinates your muscle movement with your fingers, um, it made no difference whether you were actually physically playing the piano or whether you were playing the piano. And what's really cool is that they took the individuals that were playing the piano, and this is how well they could play. They took the individuals that only played once and was practicing mentally. When they played the next time, they were just as good.
Mm-hmm.
They caught up really quickly to the person that was um, playing or practicing on a consistent basis. And sports, we've talked about that before, how they use that visualization technique a lot. And it was just
Mm-hmm.
really pivotal to point that out, of how strong the mind is, because the reality is the mind does not know the difference between what is imagined and what is real. And the more you can visualize with all of those senses to make it feel as real as possible, the more your brain is going to recognize that as real. It's not going to know the difference. And I thought that was really, really key, because that's the whole thing about affirmations, is when you put your emotion behind it, your whole sense of being, what does it feel like? What does it look like? What does all of that mean when you're doing that? When you're saying something like, I am confident, well, what does it feel like to be confident? Put it all in there. What would it feel like if I was confident? And you throw that behind the whole statement, and your brain cannot tell the difference. And the more time you practice something, the stronger that neural connection is going to become. And that's something that you and I have been seeing and learning through neuroplasticity and all types of different readings and understandings that we've been learning. And it takes time. Those connections get stronger the more they're practiced. So, he's talking about the whole thing of, say it, believe it, even if it's not true, right?
Yeah, I think the whole
Yet,
feeling it is like people talk about act as if it's already there. I mean, you
right.
have to be happy in the now. And I think he had to figure that out. And so, but he didn't figure it out on his own, right? He had mentors in that giving him books and advice. And then, yeah. And then he falls off the wagon a little bit, and he has some realizations, which I think are cool too, because we all fall off the wagon. We're human.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to go into any of those, or?
Um, well, let's go into the next one and then put it all together.
Okay, so
which
what's the
is
next one?
thinking time, which I can super appreciate because I think you're the same, where we could just get up and the treadmill's moving already and we just get on and we're just like mind thinking, mind thinking, mind thinking. Sit at the computer, do this, do that. I mean, my laundry list before I go to bed, that was the first thing I tackled this morning. I was like, oh, because then I'm thinking about stuff that I needed that I need to add to today. But when you take the time to have your personal space where you're just with your thoughts, I think that's when some of the best intuition comes to you.
Mm-hmm.
And you get those little nudges and whatever, you know, God's voice or whatever, you know, whatever you want to call it. It's just, that's where the secret sauce is. That's what I've noticed in my life. And I would really press myself this year. Let's see here. I need to write that time. So what are we calling this? We're calling this thinking time. Is low. I really need that to be really high and make that a priority because I do get a lot out of that.
Right. That thinking time, just to refocus, right? Because he talks about how crisis enters your life when you lose focus, right? And
And
business
how does he
failure.
know? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. How does he
And
know?
same with business failure. He talks about certain things that he did with business that failed
Mm-hmm.
before hitting it correctly. Now, when you are experiencing failure, and I really hate that word, but anyway, when you experience failure, uh, one of the things that you can do to learn from that is to analyze what exactly were you focused on? What were the goals that you were driving towards at the time that led to failure? And from that, you can determine, okay, well, that's the wrong focus, right? He talks about how, you remember was it a gym that he owned, or was it where he got this space and he focused on this great big giant location because he figured the space was what he needed?
Yeah. It wasn't a
And
gym. He was just expanding his company.
it was a real estate business. I don't
Yeah.
remember what it was,
Well, he
but
wanted to look all like classy and big, and he went too big too fast and
well, he
didn't think
focused on the
about it.
space.
Yeah.
He focused on the space instead of the client. And that's one of the things that he recognizes, that I'm focusing on the wrong thing. I'm focusing on the space. And the minute he stopped focusing on the space and he started focusing on the client, that's when the world just changed for him
Mm-hmm.
completely, because he focused on the client. You can't have the space if you don't have the client. You need to focus on the right thing at the right time. You can't put the cart before the horse. We've all heard it before.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, he took the time to analyze it. And I
right.
think, yeah.
Right. So when we're experiencing failure, to recognize what we're actually focusing on, and we can even take this into trading right now, because focusing on the money, okay, is the first and surest way of blowing an account, failing as a trader, having to give it up and go back to getting a job. Okay. Focusing on the money is the wrong direction. Focusing on what's important, which is your mindset, because as far as I'm concerned, trading is 90% mindset and then 10% skill. And if you focus on that mindset, the money is a byproduct of quality mindset, quality habits,
Mm-hmm.
quality behaviors, all of those types of things. It comes from that as a product, a byproduct of good habits. So the focus shouldn't be on the money, chasing the money. It should be on chasing that good mindset, that good system, that good set of habits, that good discipline. That's
Yeah.
what needs to be the focus.
Yeah. And if
Right?
you're in business or have a business, then you're focusing on bringing value. How do I
Right.
bring value? You know, and
Yeah.
then bringing value and helping people in whatever way you help them, whatever
Mhm.
situation you help improve in someone's life or something like that.
Yeah.
That's where money follows your value too. So, yeah.
All right. So for our listeners, I would like to throw out a challenge to you guys. I'd like to, if you're following us along in the book, great. I'd like to challenge you to start,
Mm-hmm.
thinking about, right, go through this goal process. Write down what your goals are for 2023. Write them down. What don't you want for 2023? Go through the whole process that we discussed in this episode. And let's see if we can't start hitting out some of those goals all year round for all of us. All right. And Kristen, great conversation once again.
Mm-hmm.
And we will see you in the next episode when we go through the next set of principles.
Awesome.